recorded live from Hong Kong and Toronto. Let's go! This is the PR and Law Podcast.
The PR and Law Podcast.
Turn it up. With your hosts, Cam McMurtry and Ewan Christie.
Welcome to episode 64 of the PR and Law Podcast. I'm your host, Cam McMurtry, along with Ewan Christie.
Hello, Cameron.
Ewan's an employment lawyer in Toronto, Canada, and I'm a PR guy in Hong Kong and publisher of the Digital Bits PR and Communications newsletter at digitalbitspr.com. If you enjoy the podcast, please tell a friend, and you can follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, of course. Also our YouTube and SoundCloud channels if you prefer. And also sign up for our newsletter if you get a sec. You can go to PRLawPodcast.Club and we will send you updates on when new shows drop and all kinds of other show news, so don't miss that. Ewan, we've got a busy show planned today. We've got a guest coming on shortly. But how are things going with you? It seems like it's been a busy week. There's lots of news happening.
Yeah. You know what else it's been a busy week for, Cam, is sports.
Yeah, that's right, actually.
This has been like the craziest. I mean, as you know, I'm not a huge sports guy. I don't really watch all that much sports. But in the last 24 hours, we've had the Copa America final which was, between Argentina and Brazil, the men's Wimbledon final this morning, the Euro final between Italy and England. And then you've got game 3 of the NBA finals between the Suns and the Bucks going on as we speak here. So.
Because it's morning and I just woke up here, and actually the Euro final started at 3 a.m. Hong Kong time. Who won? I don't even know yet.
Italy won.
Okay.
They went to penalty shootout. And they won.
Okay.
I think they were the better team. I'm sure we'll get some hate mail from English supporters for that, but I think Italy deserved the win, I think.
Yeah, England went on a bit of a run there too. I mean, they did well. I know that when they beat Denmark, that was kind of an iffy one, because Denmark's kind of been the Cinderella story of the tournament. But yeah, there has been lots of sports going on. And I want to take this little moment to brag a bit, because I do believe I said 5 games that Tampa Bay would beat Montreal to win the Stanley Cup as well, and I was bang on.
You did.
That one.
I was cursing you as I watched my beloved Montreal Canadiens lose, Cam. But
yeah, I think there was one team superior than the other in that one. Anyway, let's get started because we've got lots to cover today.
Continue the debate with us on social media. Join us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at PR Law Podcast. All one word, PRLAW Podcast. Send us your questions now by email to askus@PRLawPodcast.com. That's all one word, askus@PRLawPodcast.com. Or on social media with the hashtag PRLawPod. That's hashtag PRLAWPOD.
We spoke a couple of weeks ago, Ewan, about Future.com, this new sort of publication that was put together by Andreessen Horowitz, the venture capital fund in the Valley, and just how, they set this up sort of in response to what they felt was overly negative coverage of technology, sort of in the mainstream media. So they just went ahead and built their own media to deal with that. So we want to talk a bit more about that today, and we've got the Vice President of Strategy and Marketing at Carbon Collective, Bryan Murphy. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Cam. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome, thanks. And Bryan and I actually got to know each other because we're both part of the Forbes Communication Council, which is also something where it's a great resource sort of for communications people. But Bryan, before we dive into the issue, I mean, what's Carbon Collective? Tell us sort of what you do there and what that's about.
Yeah, so Carbon Collective, I just started over here. We're a startup fintech ESG company, and we are an online climate-friendly investment platform. And really one of the issues that we're seeing is to solve climate change, we're going to radically need to increase the amount of money going into climate solutions. And so we're just trying to play a part in that. And, so it's an exciting new thing that we're getting to do. And, I've been having a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, that's a really sort of emerging new area. So it sounds like a good time to sort of get involved in that. I mean, you've worked in communications and marketing in LA or in the LA area, it looks like, for some time now, sort of in healthcare and obviously now in sort of investing. And it looks like even sports a bit earlier on. I mean, what changes have you seen sort of in communications throughout your time in the business?
Yeah. So So my family actually had an ad agency for 25 years. And so I had a pretty good look into really the evolution of what's going on in marketing and PR. And because my family business was, I mean, think Don Draper, the end of the Mad Men era. That's kind of like where my dad was coming out of, like the classic do your market research, deep strategy, like all that sort of, positioning work and testing. And as I graduated college and came into the business, there was a huge fragmentation and disruption of Google and Facebook, which, I mean, publicly are technology companies, but I mean, really they're advertising companies, right? Because that's where all of their revenue is coming from. And so it caused this dramatic shift in how agencies were functioning. And so what I saw for years and years was this real fragmentation. And I'm actually starting to see, and this, this Andreessen Horowitz move is actually part of this like reintegration around technology. And I think it's they're definitely not the only one doing this. I mean, I think you saw HubSpot, they bought The Hustle, which was like a similar sort of play, but rethinking what it is that you need to do online to really deliver to, your clients, your consumers, raising brand awareness for people who haven't even heard of you before. So I think that there's like a lot of interesting aspects to what they're doing.
I mean, it's been out there for a while now that companies really do have the power to do their own content, right? I mean, they've got websites, they've got social channels where they can publish to lots of people. So that ability has been there, but I don't think we've seen a company really launch what it considers a new publication the way Andreessen Horowitz did. Do you see what they're doing as really sort of groundbreaking, or just kind of an extension of what companies have kind of been doing for the last several years when it comes around to content creation?
I mean, I would say it's one of those like important leveling ups that is an extension of everything that's been going on. Because if you look at what's been happening, and Ken, you were talking about PR, I'm a little bit more on the marketing side, but this becomes more of an integration of PR and marketing, right? You're trying to control your narrative so much that you're hiring editors, you're making sure you have the great email newsletters that are really top of mind. For people that care about this topic that is technology, right? But in terms of like being brand new, I think it's just like the dedication of resources to this, knowing that, I mean, from a marketer standpoint, I'm looking at the SEO implications of this, and like they have a very big opportunity to own a piece of online real estate in perpetuity, right? So, not just, getting your name in a byline, like you're trying to help with your, in your line of work, but also having like the backlinks and being able to track new people and then becoming, the thought leaders. I mean, not that Andreessen Horowitz needs that much help in being the thought leaders, but it really starts to cement them in a way where all of these articles and podcasts can live on in perpetuity. Because the one thing I will say is, even in the article that you sent over to me was talking about how they were attempting to do this as a way to control the message around traditional like journalists. They're not going to, I don't think they're going to change traditional media, right? Because there's a real role for that, but they will be able to build out their base and their footprint around the types of people that they want to continually attract, whether it's from an investment perspective, or if they're looking for more companies to come to them to help raise capital. I just think it puts them in a really strong seat for them to continue to, deliver on their mission.
Yeah, you make a good point about marketing and PR too, because you're right. This is much more marketing, I think, that they've done. On the PR side, I mean, we always like to use these networks or website once they have a big audience in case of a crisis or some other issue that we have to deal with, and we can go directly, to the audience. But I think one thing that they're going to have to deal with, Andreessen Horowitz and I think companies in general, just is the sense that the content is maybe not objective, and that it might be just whitewashed a little bit in terms of whatever topic that they're dealing with. Is this something that you have had to deal with sort of in your own career, or is there a way around this, do you think?
I mean, I did think the thing that was most interesting from what I've been watching from them is that they're bringing on outside expertise. But I don't believe that they're ever going to be able to fully get over this perspective. And I don't even think they need to, right? I think this is more about having a real online presence in a much broader way than people have historically understood it. And they can have a massive footprint, a massive email marketing following, and they'll be able to draw talent. Like if they came up to me and like, hey, do you want to write an article, for Future? I would say like, hell yes, I want to write for you guys. And so like that level of owning a part of the ecosystem, I think is so important for what they're doing, that whether or not it's biased is sort of a secondary piece of concern. That's what I say, because I don't think it's realistic that they can overcome the bias issue. And the thing that I'd add to that is I don't think they can actually do this in such a way where they can displace traditional media, because traditional media, is supposed to be as much as possible objective, covering daily news, covering big events, like showing like investigative journalism. Like it has a really important role that like in our society. And this is all it is trying to make sure that, on the internet, Andreessen Horowitz is going to own this area, and in 5 or 10 years, you're going to be able to see, more people finding them.
Yeah, that's a good sort of point on the bias, because I say that even in my own company now. I'm at Tencent, which is, even though this information is coming from a company with an interest here, a lot of this is still new information. It's factual still, and there is interest here. I mean, reporters may not pick this up and run it verbatim, but it might tip them off to something that results in positive coverage for us at some point down the line. So, yeah, there's definitely still value with that content.
Yeah, and I'm sure you see this all the time, is when you're working on PR stories, how much easier is it to earn a story in traditional media if you've already had something written about it?
For sure. And reporters also, when they're working on something, they look for more information on that subject, right? And if you've got something on your website where there's a few quotes and some pictures or maybe a video of whatever that they're working on, it's more likely they'll use that in their article. And then that also reflects well, right, on the company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it's going to have influence. I just think it's not going to have this total online overhaul. Though I think that there are like greater implications of how they could evolve Future over time as well.
Well, and also, I mean, isn't this also just an issue of, the media has become, as Cam, we've been a frequent discussion point on our show, just the general polarization around news and media in general. So, I mean, isn't there almost some value here if you're going to create something of an echo chamber to just lean into it and own it and be, just be 100% on board with that idea of, no, we're going to continue to sort of perpetuate this particular view on technology. And we're perfectly okay with that, as opposed to trying to challenge it, because at least it's a message that you want and a message that you're ultimately controlling.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I do like the dance that they're trying to do, which is like adding outside contributors. But I think that again, that's how they can own this part of the online ecosystem.
I've got one more for Breen here. I mean, do you think this is going to be successful? Because, I mean, we've seen companies do this in different ways. Future.com to me doesn't look that great, but I'm not sure if that even really matters. They've got a lot of interesting content on there, and I have gone through some of it. And, your point about if they asked you to write, you'd be happy to do so. Me too, actually, So I definitely believe in it from that sense. But do you think this is something that they will continue to invest in long term, or do you think there's a possibility that this doesn't really work out for them?
Well, there's always going to be a possibility that something doesn't work out, because we're speculating from the outside. And I think it depends a lot on what the internal metrics are that they're trying to achieve, right? Mm-hmm. Now, if they're looking at it from an improving, because it's a subdomain, like even though it's future.com, it's still redirecting to the A16Z website. So if they're looking at it from a level of domain authority, if they're looking at it, from a perspective like increasing readership, if they're looking at, increasing the email newsletter, then I think, they'll continue to do this for a long time, because it's going to be fun and valuable, and it will make them like an essential part of the VC. I mean, not that they're already not an essential part of the VC, like world, but it just makes it more likely that they'll have a longer footprint, that people will remember reading articles, years later if they're Googling something and find it. Now, I think if their goals are around let's displace traditional media, and they have these incredibly lofty ambitions, I don't think that will work. So I don't know what they're doing internally, but I know it can work in certain parameters. And if I were them, I would I would probably continue to do it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Anything else you want to add on this one, Breen, before we wrap up?
I mean, I think, they shouldn't stop here if they're going to do this. Like, and look at the larger positive benefits that this could bring to society, right? Because there's going to be so many people who want to better understand how they do what they do. And even when it comes to just starting a business, right? Just really starting a great business. And right now they're talking to, CEO, founder, my level, VP of strategy and marketing, like they're talking like on that level, people who are on the executive level. I think if they want to expand the readership, if they want to expand the reach, like looking out at more content, even getting into college students who are thinking about how can they start their first business. There's a lot of implications for what they could do to improve how people think and create businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us, Breen. It was great having you on the show to talk about this, because it's a very pertinent issue that I think companies are going to be dealing with more and more sort of as time goes along here. Yeah,
Cam, thank you so much for having me. Ewan, it was a pleasure to talk with y'all. And if you ever need me back, just you know where to find me.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you. Yeah, that's Breen Murphy from the Carbon Collective and the Forbes Communications Council. Thank you, Breen.
Show your support to the PR and Law podcast by making a one-time donation or setting up a subscription with us on Patreon. Every little bit helps us keep the lights on and bring the show to you each week. If you'd like to chip in, please visit PRLawPodcast.com. That's PRLawPodcast.com. Click support the show. Thanks for helping us out.
All right, Ewan, what do you have on deck?
Well, Cam, what do you think about the 4-day work week?
Oh, I love that idea. I love it.
I thought you might. Well, I'm not sure if you saw this. It was a pretty big story, actually, over the week. The 4-day work week trial in Iceland. So this is sort of the results of a trial that was launched by the federal government in Iceland in 2015. So it's been running for quite a while, and it involved 2,500 workers in sort of a range of different workplaces, Cam. And this is sort of how they structured things. They were given the ability to reduce their week by the equivalent of one workday, basically. So they didn't have to do it all in one day. If you wanted to take a 3-day weekend, cool, you could do that. Or if you wanted to sort of, limit an hour a day, Monday through Friday, you could do that as well. You could spread it however you wanted to. The only thing was that it was a day that was knocked off somewhere in equivalent hours. And critically, of course, salaries remained the same through this process. So nobody was taking a pay cut.
Unless you're working on an hourly wage, I guess.
Well, yeah, I guess if you're working on an hourly wage, then yeah, it probably probably didn't work. I assume these were all salaried employees. And do you want to take a guess as to what some of the results were, Cam?
Well, I'm going to guess that people liked it. I don't know about the company's side, but I haven't seen the results of this. I was aware of the study, and I saw some headlines on it, but I don't know the results. So go for it.
Yeah, well, I mean, sure, you're right. And it almost seems sort of self-explanatory that if you cut people's hours, they're ultimately going to be happier human beings. And lo and behold, that proved to be the case. Workers were happier. They had lowered measured stress levels. But here's what was really, really fascinating about the results of the study. Productivity levels remained about the same and in some cases actually improved. And, it was interesting in sort of going through the results. A lot of workers said that they were able to increase their productivity simply by shortening meetings or cutting them out entirely, or, removing those sort of 15, 20-minute coffee breaks that you might take throughout the day, eliminating all of that stuff. And lo and behold, your productivity increases despite the fact that you're removing the equivalent of a work day per week.
There's so much in this to talk about, Ewan. I have long said that people will work to the hours they're expected to work. Asia, I think, is very different in this respect because in a lot of countries over here, people are expected to be in the office until 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, regardless of whether they have work to do. It's just sort of part of the culture in some places over here. And when that happens that way, people are working until 9 or 10. They have things to do, but I've always believed that if you let them go at 5 o'clock, they'll have that finished by 5 o'clock. There's a way to get this stuff done if you're incentivized to get it done and be more productive. And maybe that's a little bit of what's shown up in Iceland, is just this ability to get things done when you know that you've got a bit of a reward, that you can go home earlier or have just 4 days of a work week.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and look, I think, it's not uncommon for employees to often need a little bit of a, kick in the pants to get that project or whatever the item is that needs to get done over the finish line, right? And that increased bit of pressure in terms of, hey, I've got to get out of the office because I want to get out of the office. Or, it's Thursday afternoon and I know I'm not coming into work on Friday, so I need to get this stuff done. Yeah, I mean, it compels you to sort of structure your day accordingly and ensure that you are working in a more efficient manner. As a result of the trial, 86% of workers in Iceland have moved to this new shorter work week model. And again, what's fascinating about this is it's not like they can do this without the employers buying in, right? I mean, employers have to be on board with this. And, one of the things that I thought was really compelling evidence from an employer's perspective was that there was all kinds of evidence across these different workplaces of these 2,500 workers that showed that sick days were dramatically reduced. And that doesn't surprise me in the least. At least anecdotally, I know workers who typically abuse sick days rather predictably do so on a Friday or a Monday, right? To sort of cheat a longer weekend. Well, if you know you're going to get a long weekend every week and you have more time to sort of rest and relax, then yeah, I mean, predictably, employees likely are going to take fewer sick days, which again increases productivity and is good for employers as well, right?
Yeah, and I understand everything that's come out of this study, and I do think most people would prefer 4 days at work. I would prefer just 4 days at work. I would love more time off. Now, that said, I do anticipate some pushback along the lines of, what has Iceland created for the world with their reduced work week? I know it just started, right. But I can see Americans saying, like, look, if you want to pull ahead and if you want to be number one, you've got to do more than that. You've got to be more productive than that. And I'm not saying I agree with this, but I do suspect this argument is coming. And it reminds me of a quote from Scott Galloway, again, who we've talked about on this show, and I don't have it in front of me. I was looking for it. But it was along the lines of, if you're in your 20s, you should not even be thinking about a work-life balance. You should be working nonstop to create a situation where you can find financial security down the line. The idea of finding your passion or work-life balance is just, it should not even be something that you even think about if you want to get ahead. Now, that's his point of view, and that flies in the face of what's happening in Iceland. Ewan, I mean, for you, do you think this is kind of a one-size-fits-all, or do you suspect there might be some challenges to some of these findings?
Yeah, I think inevitably there are going to be some challenges. I mean, some of the challenges that immediately come to mind is managers in particular, or workers with heavy workloads, right? I mean, they're presumably going to have and face additional stress in having even fewer hours to sort of complete their work in a given week. I mean, that's one issue. The other issue is, trying to communicate effectively with employees due to the reduced hours, right? If everybody's sort of working on a sort of a makeshift schedule in terms of maybe you have one employee who leaves work an extra hour or an hour early every day, and then you've got another employee who takes Mondays off and another employee who takes his Friday off, how do you sort of structure an effective communication model to make sure things get done when they need to get done if everybody's sort of on a different schedule, right? I mean, I think that's sort of why, that the sort of Monday through Friday 9 to 5 has become so ubiquitous traditionally. And I know we're, for obvious reasons, moving away from that model, but that's traditionally why that's what it's been, is everybody's in the same place at the same time when work needs to get done. So yeah, there's going to be challenges. I don't foresee this really changing anything in a North American context. I would be really shocked if we see large companies adopting this plan. But I mean, I know that Spain, for example, is looking to move to that model, and a lot of people, a lot of countries, a lot of companies are looking at this Icelandic study to see if is there some merit to this? Could we increase productivity? I think that's really what it comes down to, right, Cam? If you can provide some demonstrable evidence that in eliminating an additional day of work or the equivalent of, an hours of an additional day of work per week, and it increases the productivity, well, that increases a company's bottom line. And we know that fundamentally that is always priority number one, right?
Yeah. And this does require some sort of enlightenment at these companies to accept it too, right? I mean, there's some traditions that really die hard in some of ththese cases. I do want to mention one thing here too, just because it's not well known, I think, outside of Hong Kong, which is we had a 6-day work week here. Like a full Saturday is a full work day up until around 2000. I mean, it's quite recent. And even now, Saturday is a half day, technically. So in Hong Kong, we have a 5.5 day work week now, and people are expected to go to the office for a few hours on Saturday morning. Now, companies, the sort of forward-thinking companies, have decided not to enforce this. In many cases, in sort of knowledge economy jobs, that's been the case. But a lot of places still do enforce it. And people are coming into the office, and there is a rush hour on Saturday morning and around noon on Saturday when people get off work, which is quite different compared to North America, because I think this would not be accepted in a lot of places. But I think it just goes to show how long it takes for some of these things to change. I mean, we're still figuring out whether we should keep a half-day Saturday working, let alone going down to just a 4-day week. There's always pressure on here. There's always going to be interests in terms of business and governments and whatever. And you're right. I think one of the key things to happen is to prove that this is actually, it makes you more productive, that it helps the bottom line. I think if there can be a really coherent case made there, that will really push this along much further.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think the other interesting point, Cam, is if we're seeing an increase in remote work versus in-office FaceTime, how is that going to affect sort of the set established hours? Because, I mean, let's be honest, we know full well that productivity among workers who are simply continuing to sit in front of their computers because, they want to be perceived as continuing to work by their managers or superiors, there's no productivity there. There's no work being done. It's simply a matter of FaceTime from a junior employee who's looking to sort of advance. Now, not always, but I certainly think there is probably some evidence to support that. But if you sort of remove that FaceTime element, then how do you create these benchmarks for productivity in terms of punching in and punching out in a given workday, right?
Yeah, it'll be much harder to measure. On my own little soapbox here, Ewan, I actually would prefer more flexibility to work than like a 4-day work week, 3-day weekend sort of set in stone. I think I've kind of mentioned this before on the show. I do value flexibility a lot. I mean, I'm in a situation now where, I'm working out of Hong Kong. I have fairly flexible work location parameters around my job. And, with the pandemic, I haven't been back to Canada in a year and a half. Obviously, I haven't seen, family, my parents, etc. So I would like to head back. There's still a quarantine requirement, though, coming back into Hong Kong, which means I need to calculate quite a long period of time if this is something I'm going to do. And I am very appreciative because I am able to set aside, maybe I have a week in Canada where I'm visiting people and it's a holiday, and maybe I add on another week or 2 or 3 where I am working, but I'm working from there. And this kind of flexibility is what I value more than anything else. I don't mind working weekends. I don't mind working late. I don't mind working on holiday, as long as I get this kind of flexibility. If I can do it from Canada, for instance, and it's not a matter of you have to be back in this office in Hong Kong by 8 a.m. Monday morning, that's really valuable to me. That's more valuable to me than a 4-day work week. And so that's where I stand, but I think I'm probably in the minority on that.
Well, I suspect you are, but I'm actually with you on that point too, right? It's just the idea of those sort of handcuffs around you, of you must physically be in this place between this hour and this hour. And again, I think, the evidence, it just doesn't bear out from a productivity perspective that there continues to be merit from that position in that sort of traditional work environment. But again, as this is all going to come down to the millennials and the Gen Zers, right? They are fundamentally going to transform the working environment. And I think, this is going to be part of that conversation, Gam. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens down the road.
Wait a minute.
Check this out.
Whoa, hey, check this out. No, wait. Check it out.
I want you to check this out.
On the PR and Law Podcast.
All right, Ewan, what have you got?
Well, I finally got around to reading the Britney Spears conservatorship nightmare story, Cam, by Ronan Farrow and Gia Tolentino in the New Yorker.
Yeah.
You seen this yet?
I've seen it. I have not read it yet, though.
Wow. Wow. It's just wow. And I was reminded of, I don't know if you remember this, Cam, but when the Weinstein story broke in the New Yorker that Farrow wrote, you and I happened to be in Bangkok. And this story came up and you pulled it up immediately. And I remember,
I do remember this.
Hearing, I remember you sort of like humming and hawing, like, oh my God. Wow. Like, what are you reading, Cam? And you sort of told me, and then I pulled it up. And, despite sort of being in Thailand when we should have been out sort of enjoying the day and wandering about, we were, sort of huddled in front of our laptops, sort of like bombing through this sort of blockbuster story. It's obviously it's not quite on that level, but it's just an insane story. And I know you had watched the recent sort of New York Times documentary on Britney Spears's conservatorship. I saw it too, and I found it to be somewhat lacking in terms of depth and just the actual background and substance of what was going on. I found it to be really speculative, and it didn't have a lot of teeth. That's not the case with this story. I mean, it's got all the background and then some that you would want to sort of piece together why this continues to be such a crazy and compelling story.
So why, and because I'm not an expert on this story, I've seen it everywhere, and I've got so many articles saved into my Instapaper to read later, but I haven't actually gone through them yet. What is the argument made for maintaining this conservatorship?
Great question. I don't know. And I haven't, I'm at a loss having read this article. I think Ronan Farrow is at a loss as to why this continues to be status quo.
Because there's got to be a reason, right? I mean, the judge isn't sitting there just thinking he doesn't like Britney Spears, so he's going to do this. Like, theoretically, there's some sort of
not at all
claim here that still has validity, right?
Yeah. I don't know.
Anyway, Ewan, I actually set aside something that I thought this is going to be my check this out this week. 100%, bar none. This is it, and I cannot find it. So I'm going to have to hold it on for next week because there's other things. Every week I'm always looking at a lot of different things. So the other one, Barry Weiss, is a former New York Times reporter who left. She's particularly angry about sort of woke culture or cancel culture. And her newsletter is quite interesting, actually. I have been following it since she left the Times, and she's published an issue of her newsletter called "Winston Marshall Was Bloody Terrified to Quit Mumford and Sons. He Tells Me Why." And this circulates, or it is about Winston Marshall, who tweeted a book that he had read was interesting. He felt the book was interesting. Turned out to be a kind of far-right book, and he got pilloried on social media to the point he had to make an apology. And that never sat well with him. And he has decided, no, I'm not going to sit and tolerate this. And he's come back and quit the band, basically, over this, so he can speak his mind. So I think people have some pretty clear views on the issue of whether cancel culture is even a thing or not. But it's another example just of somebody who is stepping away from things that they do love so they can speak more openly. It's an interesting interview. And along with it is a video interview between the two, and also an audio file, or you can sort of read how that interview went. So there's a couple of different options in terms of your multimedia interests.
Did you read his statement, Cam, when he
I did, yes.
Announcing that he was leaving the band?
Oh no, I didn't see that one. I saw his statement when he apologized for the book.
You should, you should seek it out. In my opinion, for whatever that's worth, I thought it was incredibly well written and articulate and remarkably brave. And actually, I initially heard about this story because I saw Barry Weiss's tweet about it, saying, now who would, basically something to the effect of, who would have thunk that the most courageous person speaking up would be, a banjo player from the band Mumford and Sons. It's an incredibly articulate statement, wherein he sets out that, look, I don't have any particular political proclivities from the right or from the left. My grandparents were survivors of the Holocaust. So to have people point fingers and call me a fascist is really just an incredibly, crazy thing for me. But what was really interesting was that he consciously retracts his apology, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, he had initially come out and said, I'm really sorry about this. And he then goes on to say in this statement that, you know what? I don't apologize, and I didn't want to have to apologize in the first instance, and only did so out of respect for my bandmates, because it's not fair that they get tainted with this brush. However, now that I have left the band and can now speak freely as an individual separate and apart from the entity that is Mumford and Sons, I choose to retract this apology and will continue to sort of speak out politically as I see fit. And I thought it was a really, really brave statement, but again, a remarkably articulate statement as well. So
Barry Weiss mentioned that, PR people in particular will tell you to apologize to get over whatever heat is on you in that moment. And that's true. I think if you look at it from a PR perspective, it is lower the risk, fix the situation, right? That becomes number one. And if that means you have to put together a heartfelt apology, then so be it, because the objective is, to end whatever's going on. Now, that might not always be the objective of the person. It might be that they want to stand up for what they believe in. And I certainly admire that much more, and I admire him for doing this. But it certainly isn't something a communications person would normally recommend, just because it does mean that he's probably going to lose something, and it's going to become much more of an issue in the future. But as I think, more people are doing this, though, that it's slow. And I think the trickle is just kind of picking up steam now, for people just saying, like, look, no, I did think this book was interesting, and that doesn't make me a fascist. And I think it does need kind of pushback. Otherwise, you sort of cede that ground to critics, and I think that's kind of dangerous too. Well,
yeah, absolutely. And look, I mean, if you are a believer in freedom of expression, of freedom of speech, then, these are rights that we need to protect and we need to support, regardless of whether or not you agree or disagree with what an individual might have to say. I mean, these are critically important concepts of a modern and functioning democracy. So anyway, cool. Good for him for standing up anyway.
Anything else you want to mention, Doc?
No, I think that's it.
Yeah, fast-moving show. Thanks again to Breen Murphy for joining us earlier.
Yeah, thanks, Breen.
From the Carbon
fantastic.
Collective, and I think we've got some more guests coming up. So it should be make sure you're subscribing in your podcast app of choice. Or, of course, you can listen to our YouTube or SoundCloud channels. You can subscribe to the show there as well. And you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and please sign up for our newsletter. You can find that at PRLawPodcast.Club. So for Ewan, Christy, and our guest, Breen Murphy, this is Cam McMurchie. Light it up.
This has been the PR and Law Podcast with Cam McMurchie and Ewan Christie. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or leave a review. You can also join us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook by following our account at PR Law Podcast. That's all one word, PRLAW Podcast. Thanks for your support.